Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of the Infinity series and founder of Engine Books. Let's see what we have today. Thank you very much for joining us for a special episode of the Write Project podcast. I know I say they are all special. This one definitely is. We have on with us Andrew Hawthorn, currently best known for his work with the CBC as a wonderful journalist. But I know him as the author of Silvern Voices from Mythology from the Rock, the best-selling 2021 anthology. And previous to this, I knew him as the author of Mere Appendix from Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 54, January 2009. Andrew Hawthorn, in your experience, what are common traps for aspiring authors, pitfalls, or whatever that they get themselves into?
Common traps for aspiring writers. I guess the most common trap for an aspiring writer is just to not write. It's very easy to wait for inspiration to hit you, and really, like, the common trap if you're writing a book about writing or how to be a writer is to tell people to write, and that's it. And I've got whole books that I've read, and all they say in the book is you should really write every day, and that's not very helpful. Really, what you need is how do I approach an agent or something like that. But you know, like you do need to do the work, and you need to figure out how to feed your inspiration to do that too. And so, trust your ideas. Like you'll always get 2 weeks into a project and think that it sucks because you're tired of it now. Imagine watching the same episode of a sitcom for 2 weeks. Like you're gonna hate it by the end of it, if you even liked it to begin with. So, write, trust your original instincts, and get it out there.
Awesome. Great advice. I like it. Andrew Hawthorn, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, little Andy, what would it be?
If I could tell my younger writing self any one thing, I would say, dude, you are going to get to write Ninja Turtles. It's amazing.
Yes, correct.
Just hold on there. You can't believe it. That's what I would say.
Actually, I would go back and say, you're going to get to write Ninja Turtles, but right before the Viacom buyout. So have like 20 scripts ready so they can just put them all out before the sell.
Out there.
Yeah. Andrew Hawthorn, what is the best money you ever spent on your writing? However you want to justify spending money on your career as a writer.
The best money I've ever spent on writing. I think the best money I ever spent on writing for me was traveling into New York City to meet with people. And that is both in terms of going to conventions and talking to people, and also going to classes and things. I'm speaking specifically as a comics writer. The Museum of Cartoon and Comics Art had a number of like master classes with guys like Larry Hama, who, if you're in comics, Larry Hama is one of the great writers. But if you're not in comics, like he created all the G.I. Joes. He wrote all the origins for the Transformers. Like he's one of the architects of your childhood if you grew up in the 80s. And I did an amazing masterclass with him where he broke down one of his most well-known works panel by panel and talked about what each panel was doing and how it served the story. But especially in comics and in other types of writing too, like never underestimate the power of meeting the people you're working with, meeting your agent face-to-face, meeting your editor, meeting fans. That's what like a book tour is about. And so like actually going there, I mean, not now, wait till it's safe, but in general, it's never bad money to spend to go where the action is and do something about it.
Awesome. I like that. That's good advice. That's new advice. We haven't gotten that yet. That's awesome. Andrew Hawthorn, what did you do with the first money you ever made from writing?
The first money I ever made from writing, was probably like $50 that I made from a poem I published in Tickle Ace, I probably bought dinner. But I mean, like when I published my Turtles book, my first comic book, I took all that money and reinvested it back into comics because I was working on a pitch for a different book. And so I hired an artist to illustrate my script so that I could have illustrations to put in. And because in terms of comics, then I could keep all the rights instead of sharing rights with an artist or a company or somebody else. Like if I was hiring him as an employee, then it was still my creation. So I was reinvesting it in my career. It went nowhere, spoilers, but it was a good shot.
Cool. Andrew Hawthorn, in your opinion, what is the most unethical practice in the publishing industry right now?
The most unethical practice in the publishing industry. Well, I mean, again, I'm going to talk about comics and say that the history of comics is really dangerous for creators. And that hasn't been my experience. But, you know, if you look at the great comic creators, if you look at guys like Jack Kirby, if you look at Alan Moore, the history of comics is that the people who come up with the ideas and do the work don't own those ideas. They're owned by the companies publishing them in a way that doesn't happen as much in novels, in books, in, you know, in television and movies. Yes, it does happen, but in a lot of ways, the history of that industry has been very exploitative, and that hasn't stopped people from working for it and wanting to be a part of that. And I'm not talking about the art form. You can just write a story or publish a comic on your own without engaging in any of that, that machine. But the machine is still there, and it's a very dangerous machine that has chewed up a lot of people. And the problem is, like, that's, you know, you can just say, oh, like, darn it on its face. But that also ends up hurting the entire thing, you know? Like, you've probably noticed that for the last 20 years, if you picked up like what they call a mainstream comic book, something from Marvel or DC, there's not a lot of new superheroes. There's a lot of old superheroes with new characters. There's a different Captain America. There's a different Iron Man. And that's because nobody wants to create new heroes for those guys anymore. They're gonna own your idea, and then you don't get anything for it, right? And so that practice of chewing up the artists has hurt their business. They could have the next Spider-Man or the next Iron Man. But the business doesn't work that way anymore. So you got to be really careful with the stuff that you create and who you're working with.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I people fellow nerds that are unfamiliar, like they're just like watching it but don't know anything about what happens behind the scenes. Like I'm that next level of nerd where it's like I don't just know the character, I know the person who created the character. Everyone who gets their mind blown when I tell them that, like, Len Wein, the guy who created Wolverine, was paid to write that issue of Hulk and never since for that creation. Like, he's been paid since worked, for other comics work, but
like Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, who created Superman, like the check they were paid to create Superman and publish it for DC for Action back in the 80s is out, or in the 80s, in the 30s, is out there on the internet, and it's like a couple $100, and that's what they got paid for many years, except for like the individual work for creating an entire genre. And you know, after many legal battles, their family was able to get some, but it's, especially in comics, like there's ways you can get it, you know, in novels, and especially now you can self-publish, you can do all kinds of different things with comics or novels or anything you want to write. But if you want to go through the industry, it's a minefield. It's great. It's very rewarding. There's a lot of amazing people and amazing characters. But it's also a minefield that's hurt a lot of really brilliant people who we could have had a lot more work from if it hadn't done that.
It's not unfair. Andrew Hawthorn, what is an early experience where you learned that language has power?
An early experience where I learned that language has power. Okay, well, when I was in grade 2, we were in a class or something, and I think I drew an unflattering caricature of one of my classmates.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly what happened here. I did something that the teacher wasn't very happy with. And at the time, there were different levels of punishment you could get. Like you could get like essentially put in the corner with a dunce cap, which was getting put up in front of the board. You just have to face the board for half an hour and then go sit back down. Or you could get sent to the principal's office. It was like the worst thing ever. And I really didn't want to go to the principal's office. So when the teacher, I was up by the teacher's desk and she was trying to figure out what to do with me for whatever heinous thing I'd done. I can't even remember what I did now. I remember I'm like, I've got it. And I started muttering to myself, oh, please don't put me up in front of the board. Please don't put me up in front of the board, to reverse psychology this teacher to not send me to the office. And it worked.
That's amazing.
She's like, oh, you don't want to go up in front of the board, eh? And so I'm like, oh, I can convince people of stuff with my words. And I became a conniving brat ever since.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, this is the story of Lex Luthor being with yeah.
Well, we've got a lot in common.
Yep. Andrew Hawthorn, in your experience, what are important magazines for writers to subscribe to? I've been updating this to like blogs or newsletters to follow, YouTubers to follow, because who subscribes to writers' magazines anymore? I'm always shocked when I go to chapters and find that they still even are in print. But
they do.
Yeah.
You know, what I'm going to say is I think that the most important magazines or blogs to read are history. Archaeology magazine is really great. News. I think that as a writer, you should learn your craft. I'm not one of those people who says, you don't need to go to writing school. You just got to go out there and write. You're going to find your own way to perfect. Nobody starts as a great writer. So, practice writing, learn how to write, read what great writers have to say. You're going to need to do all that stuff. So, but I can't off the top of my head tell you where you're going to find those great entries. But what you do really need to do is do stuff other than writing, and read stuff other than stuff about writing. Like if you want to be a writer and you read all the entries about writing, what you're going to write about is writing. Yeah. You're going to write about writers. You're going to write about writer's block. You're going to write about assigning to agents, and everybody's going to hate it. I'm going to hate it. So what you really need to do is feed the engine. You need to read about, how like a lost city that they've just discovered in Egypt. You need to read about the history of why the First World War happened. You need to read about great discoveries and how scientists have done these things. And those things are going to inform your writing and inspire you to figure out what you want to write about. You need to feed yourself, and then that knowledge is going to come back in your writing in ways you don't even know. You don't have to write about the guys that discovered this Egyptian city, but the knowledge that you have of how they act and how that happened is going to make your writing better. It's going to be richer, and you're going to have a lot more to pull on to put it together when you do figure out how to write.
That makes sense, actually. I've definitely thought about that before, but when I'm thinking about it as you're saying it, when I went to university, I majored in English, like every weirdo.
We all did.
Yeah, I minored in anthropology. Love anthropology to this day. I'll pick up and read ethnographies just for fun and stuff like that. But when it comes to sitting down at the keyboard and my writing, I rarely pull from the English degree and stuff that happened there. And I always pull from anthropology and use things that I learned in anthropology. I always tell people, what should I do in class? What should I do in university if I want to be a great writer? If I don't care about the degree and I want to be a great writer, my advice is always take the intro to every single course that interests you.
Yeah.
Just baseline knowledge of everything.
Yep. The biggest impact in university, I did an English degree as well, and the English degree taught me how to write good, but and how to analyze the things that I was writing and reading. But the stuff that taught me what I wanted to write about were the history classes that put not only ideas in my head, but also that put our society in context, that showed me how people act, how people react, how this thing has kind of happened before and we always act the same way. And, you know, I have a show now with Andrew Hawthorn on CBC called Apocalypse Then, and that's all about looking back at history and seeing how we acted the last time this pandemic happened and relating it. And so like taking those kinds of classes, learning about people and things and how things have happened before, that's going to make you a richer human being and make you produce richer material.
Absolutely. Love it. Okay. Yeah, that's excellent advice. Andrew Hawthorn, as a writer, what would you choose as your mascot? Like if there was a magical spell and your writingness was transformed into an animal sidekick, what would that animal be?
Like, do I want to cuddle this animal, or is this a representation of my writing?
It's a representation of your writing purely.
I would want it to be a probably like the Loch Ness Monster.
Okay.
That'd be kind of cool. It would live in a big lake. It would be mysterious. It would be old as the dinosaurs are old. And when it came time to deadlines, nobody could find it anyway.
That's awesome. I'm shocked it's not a turtle, but it's awesome. Yeah. What can you do? How many unpublished or half-finished books do you have?
I had a lot when I was a kid. Right now, I have, if you include comic series that I've worked on, I have 4. I have a play, a novel, and 2 comic series.
Nice.
And the play is very close to being done. And the rest of it, not so much. But hey, I hope so. And I've got a lot of other things that I wish were close to being done and not done. But I'm not quite that far along with those.
That's how it goes. Yeah, like it. Look forward to seeing some of those. Andrew Hawthorn, what kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before starting a project?
Oh, a lot, and I continue researching throughout the project. Really, it depends on what you're doing, though. With a novel that I'm working on now, I've read maybe like a dozen books on the Regency period and on different things around there. And I've got for a comic series that I worked on a while ago that happened in the Napoleonic era Royal Navy. I literally have 3 bookshelves of books on that. Also, like, I should use the library more instead of just buying the books that I'm researching on. But I worked at a bookstore at the time. It was very easy to do. So a lot of research is the answer. And I think research is especially important because, you know, it's a trap. You can fall into, especially if you're writing fiction, suddenly realizing that you're just writing nonfiction history and you're talking about this era, and you're like, wait a second, this is fiction. I do have maximum control over what happens here. It doesn't just have to be a lesson in what happens. So you don't want to over-research stuff in that. You don't want to be beholden to the research.
Yep.
But you do want it to inform your practice, and especially if you don't know where you're going next, if you've got like writer's block or whatever, you need to feed it with something, and what you feed it with is research, and that will get you out of the writer's block every time.
Yeah, I agree. It's a balancing act, though. There's enough research that you've got like the building blocks in your head to reshape them and build whatever you want. Like if each piece of research is like a Lego block, you need enough to build your thing that you're building into Legos. But then there's the rabbit hole problem. I know way too many authors who, like, when they sit down to write for 3 hours, spend 2 hours and 49 minutes on Wikipedia just down the rabbit hole, you know?
Yeah, it can happen. So you need to know the limitations of what you're trying to accomplish with this.
Yep.
How much of this research is really going to inform what you're doing, and how much of it is going to overwhelm what you're doing and maybe clog it up. I've got a problem with a novel that I think I mentioned earlier that I've read a bunch of books for, that now I'm stuck in the reality of what was going on at the time, and that's interfering with the story that I'm trying to tell. So you don't want that either.
No. Yeah. Andrew Hawthorn, do you like think of writing as like a spiritual practice, man?
I think of poetry writing as a spiritual practice. In terms of, I think travel is a spiritual practice. I think going places, being in spiritual places, and those don't have to be churches, they can be, or temples, uh, are uh, are the most spiritual aspects. Like a lot of people, being outside, especially here in Newfoundland, where it's incredible, um, is spiritual practice, and it does inform your writing, and it gives you the power to get through tough stuff. Writing itself is immensely a chore. So
Yes.
I'm not going to say like, oh, this is so great. Some people are like that. I am not, and so it is not. It's not a Zen like process for me, but it is very satisfying when you're finished.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I cannot ask that question without doing
A hippie
a
voice.
a surfer voice. Like I don't know why, but it's such a spirituality, and asking about that makes me deeply uncomfortable. So I almost have to do a character. It's not like it's Michelangelo.
He's a
Yeah.
spiritual guy.
Yep. Yeah. 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 Um, let's see. Andrew Hawthorne, what period of your life do you find you write about or draw from most often? Your childhood years, teenage years, young adult, current, whatever.
It changes depending on what I'm writing. I think in my leisure time, I draw a lot on my younger years and teen years. Having grown up in the 80s, that's an era for maximum nostalgia right now, and thinking about that stuff. But nostalgia is a toxic impulse, so I try not to dwell on it too much. I think that the era I draw on most is at the moment my early 30s, where I'm trying to remember how old I am. Where I was living in the States, and to celebrate having not been shot, we went backpacking around the Mediterranean, my wife and I, for 7 weeks, and we went to Turkey and Jordan and Greece and Italy, all those places, and
Beautiful.
that was a profoundly educating and spiritual and an incredible experience. And meeting the people there and seeing wonders of the ancient world is it fills you up with things that you want to say, and experiences that you want to communicate. And so once again, like, traveling is something that I'm fortunate enough to have the privilege to be able to do. None of us have the privilege to do it now. We're all stuck at home. But if you can figure out a way to do it in a safe way in the world of tomorrow, then I recommend that.
VR. Yeah.
VR, yeah. There's lots of YouTube travel channels. You can watch those.
Maybe this is just how Ready Player One starts. Like Ready Player One, they're all wearing the helmets and they're just stuck inside, and that's the only way they get out. Maybe
Exactly.
This is secretly how that starts.
Well, I don't know if you know, but I do live in a trailer park that's on top of 7 other trailer parks. So
Me too. I'm 3 down from you, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Turn your music down once in a while, but that's fine.
Yeah, drop the sandwich down and I'll catch it and we'll be fine.
I'm dropping sandwiches all the time.
Dropping sandwiches. Let's see. Andrew Hawthorne, have you ever read, and this is one of those ones that people just stare off in the middle distance and ask me to come back to, but okay. Andrew Hawthorne, have you ever read anything that's made you think differently about fiction, about the concept of fiction?
Oh, sure, yeah. I guess the most common experience like that is when you encounter something so good that or at least you think, that you couldn't have written that. And the last time I did that was a short play here in St. John's, written by Veronica Diamond, who's a local writer and comedian. And she wrote a short sketch that was so funny and brilliant. And I was in the middle of writing a play at the time. I knew I could never do a script as good as that. And I told her so at the time. I don't think she believed me. but I think like as far as reevaluating what fiction is, for me, a lot of fiction can do that if you look into it deep enough. A lot of discussions I've had about Shakespeare have been like that. But the one that really just broke my mind is probably From Hell, the graphic novel by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell.
Okay.
And I wrote my undergraduate thesis on From Hell, and I've read it a bunch of times, and it's a entirely fictional book about Jack the Ripper, but it's also a history of Jack the Ripper and a history of histories about Jack the Ripper, and why those are problematic, and also kind of a meta text on our current relationship with history and how we think about those things. And it has so many wheels within wheels. It's my favorite book by Alan Moore, and it's just an absolutely brilliant piece of work. That it's not only a piece of work I couldn't do, but it's also just a piece of work that shows you what words can do and what comics can do, but what pieces of art can do to really change the world around you and change how you think.
Awesome. I don't think I've read From Hell. I managed to check that one out. I've picked
From
up a
Hell is
lot of
great.
more. Yeah. That's interesting. It's really interesting. Side tangent and not really, but like it's interesting that you said a fictional account of Jack the Ripper, because like my when people talk about that, because I've heard that phrase before, like, oh, it's a fictional account of Jack the Ripper, my very glib response is all accounts of Jack the Ripper are fictional. Like the people were murdered, but the whole like Jack the Ripper was completely just media made up. Everything we know about Jack the Ripper is fictional.
All that we know about Jack the Ripper are the people that were murdered, and we don't even know very much about them.
No.
And that's what this book is about. It's more a book about all of the ways we've tried to explain Jack the Ripper over the years and how muddied that process has become. And the idea of like a fractal snowflake, if you draw a circle and you start drawing lines around the circle to draw like a fractal image, you can do that forever. You can find an infinite number of ways to do that within and never have left this circle, and so never know anything else on the page. And you can think about one thing indefinitely forever, and we do tend to do that with things like mysteries like Jack the Ripper. We do that with Shakespeare. We've been analyzing and reanalyzing Shakespeare for 500 years. We do that with holy texts. We analyze and relitigate the Bible or the Torah. Like that's part of the Jewish religion, is arguing about what this means and how we can apply it to our present day. So like it's possible to at least in terms of Jack the Ripper, get lost just inside this circle and not appreciate where you are. And that's really what the book is about.
Like, I'll never check that out. Andrew Hawthorn, in your opinion, what are the ethics of writing about historical figures, real life historical figures?
What are the ethics of writing about real life historical figures? Gosh, if you're writing fiction, I don't think that there's much in the way of ethics. You can do whatever you want with them. They're yours now. They're dead anyway. They don't care.
Sure.
I think if you're writing nonfiction, that you aren't allowed to do that anymore. And you like I'm a journalist and I'm a comic book writer. And being a journalist, you were writing about historical figures, but the history is still happening when you write about news. And being a journalist isn't like being a normal person, because you are granted things by your society, you're granted a platform, and you're granted access to be able to tell those stories, but things are taken away from you as well. You're not allowed to have political opinions. You're not allowed to engage in politics on a citizen level. And you shouldn't be, because the world is trusting you to be able to give an unbiased truth about what's going on, instead of tell us what you think is the good and bad of it.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.